Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Steele. Young conductors just starting out, and those who are studying conducting. You may want to know that I have a whole set of podcast interviews that you may find very interesting. This new series includes interviews with a chief executive of a major British orchestra, a chief executive of a major agency, the leader of a major UK orchestra, plus other orchestra musicians, including my interview with Fergus McWilliam, French horn player with the Berlin Philharmonic, which is available now. If you want to hear their views on what it takes to become a great conductor, you can when you subscribe for just £5 a month over on patreon.com/A Mic on the Podium. For this small amount each month, you get these interviews plus much more. Details are in the show notes below. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who grew up in Argentina, but then went on to study in the US, where, since 2012, he's been the music director of the Camellia Symphony Orchestra in Sacramento. It's a great pleasure to welcome Christian Baldini. Christian, lovely to talk to you today. How are you?
Very well, Mike. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
Great. With everybody, I go back to the very beginning, and most of the time I go to Wikipedia or their home biography on their website, and I did exactly the same with you. And other than knowing that you were born in Argentina, I know nothing about instruments or when music first came into your life. So maybe you could tell me, when did music first come into your life, in what instrument and in what form?
Yeah, so even though I started on the piano, I was 4 when I began. I'd been begging my mom, from what she tells me, growing up in Mar del Plata, Argentina, which is it's a city about 750,000 people now. It was smaller when I grew up. It was about 500,000. And it's a beach. It's a nice place for vacation, and everybody from Buenos Aires escapes. It's about a 4-hour drive. That's where I grew up. And when I was 2, my mom tells me I started begging her to take violin lessons, even though I didn't even know what the instrument was called. I would show her with my arm going like that, showing her the bow. I want to go like this, mommy. And she tried, my mom being a nurse, and I come from a non-musical family, my father being a doctor. She tried to find me a violin teacher. And even though the city was of a considerable size, 500,000 people, music education was not, in big strength there. So she failed to find me a violin instructor or somebody who would, there is a conservatory obviously, but there was nobody who would want to teach a 2-year-old. And so there were not any youth orchestras or anything of the sort in Mar del Plata at that time. I was born in 78, the year when Argentina first won the World Cup. If we get into soccer at a later stage, I'm sure.
I'm sure we will. Definitely, yeah. Yes, I remember. I was 8 when the Argentina won the World Cup in 1978. So that's my first World Cup. I remember that.
Wow. And I was 8 the second time we won it with Maradona at the helm, and with some infamous plays against England, I'm sure we will remember. But going back to the beginnings, so I didn't start on the violin because she couldn't find one. But then 2 years later, my dad had a patient in his practice who happened to be a piano teacher who happened to live across the street from us. So that's how I started.
And so, as you said, you started playing the piano. Did you at any stage ever get to learn to play the violin?
Never.
Shame.
Never the violin, but I then took up the cello, and then I switched. I actually didn't really like the fact of having to carry this big instrument. So I switched, after a year or 2, I switched to viola. And so that was the string instrument I learned, but I never actually played the violin.
And I'm assuming you stayed in Mar del Plata and had lessons there. At what point did you seek the glowing lights that I know very well of Buenos Aires for lessons, or did you, were there summer music camps, or was everything in Mar del Plata?
No, it was probably around, by the time I was 15 or so, I realized that I would need to, especially to go to college, I would need to go to Buenos Aires. And at that time I was deciding, shall I go into, my family never pushed me in any direction. So, I considered vaguely medical school. I considered vaguely engineering because I really liked maths and physics. That were the two subjects that I really liked in school. But music had been with me since I was a little boy, and composing especially was my favorite thing to do ever since I started playing the piano. And so by the time I was 15, I think I stopped fooling around with different options, and I thought, okay, music it is, and my parents were supportive of it, which I was very grateful for. And I realized the best place to go was in Buenos Aires, so I did a little trip, I think before I entered my last year of high school, or 2 years before, just to go into the two separate options, which were either in La Plata or in Buenos Aires. And it became very clear that Buenos Aires was a much better option for me, for what I needed. And so I started preparing myself for those exams I would have to take to get into the School of Music in Buenos Aires. And it was at that time, things have changed now, but at that time, the Catholic University, which is where I studied, the UCA, so-called UCA, was a 7-year degree for your bachelor's degree. And that included, it was 5 years of the BA or BM itself, plus 2 years of pre-qualifications that you had to do. So it was very much in the style of the French Conservatoire long-range system. And so I decided immediately that, okay, I need to do a lot of work to get ready for this. And so I started taking private lessons, specifically in counterpoint, in harmony, in theory, and oral skills, so to be able to skip at least one of those 2 years of requirements. So that's what I did to get ready.
And so you go to UCA, the Catholic University of Argentina in Buenos Aires, and I read that you did composition and conducting.
That's right.
Had conducting been a thought before you went there? I mean, did you choose to do that, or did that sort of happen during the time that you were at UCA?
So at the beginning, luckily, it was a common core. You could begin and kind of give yourself, since it was such a long degree, you had at least 2 years pretty much in which there were no separate subjects for the different specializations. So, but from the beginning, I knew composition for sure, and conducting maybe if I find that I have the chops, and I like the idea of the challenge of the rigorous training that conducting needed. And so I thought, even if I end up not being good enough for this, I think it might give me some good tools that I can put to use as a composer as well. That was my thought to begin with.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, if I look back at my own life, the first time I ever conducted was one of my own pieces. I was a joint first study composition and violin student at the Conservatory in Birmingham. And, the first time I ever conducted was one of my own pieces. And, later on, I went on to become a conductor, and I've written three pieces in 35 years, but I think the point is that many composers would have benefited from having some sort of conducting knowledge, lessons, to help them, when you first start out as a composer, to be able to conduct your own music is a big bonus, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly how I started as well. Putting together concerts with some of my composer friends, and suddenly realizing somebody needs to stand up and wave their arms, and that's how I started. And some of them were not really comfortable doing it, and they would say, hey, do you want to do my piece as well? And that's how it started, exactly. And I always recommend it when I work with, especially with young composers who are starting their career. If they haven't done any conducting, I always suggest, give this a try, because it will make you think of music in a different way, and that mechanical aspect of things can be very helpful for a composer.
So, and therefore, somebody was teaching you conducting at UCA. Who would that be?
That was Guillermo Scarabino, who is, he's been the great mentor and teacher of most Argentinian conductors, really, of at least my generation and previous ones.
Somebody I have met on numerous occasions, because, dear listeners, I have visited Buenos Aires on about 9 or 10 or 11 occasions and conducted 2 or 3 different orchestras there. Love the place. And yeah, Scarabino is he's sort of been around forever and conducted everybody, and virtually every time I go, his name's mentioned, or I bump into him or whatever. What was his teaching style like? I ask a lot of conductors, was he an overall package, or was he much more into stick technique than the score? How did he teach?
He was a great man. We're still in touch. Somebody who was a model in many many ways. He was very technical, so I'm very grateful that as my first teacher I had somebody who was very meticulous about the stick technique. His training had been he had been studying in Vienna with Swarovski, and he studied also in the U.S. in Eastman at the Eastman School of Music. So he had quite a variety of in his foundation in himself, and he was very very strict in many ways. I remember in our orchestra rehearsals, everybody was terrified of him, and this is both musicians in the orchestra and my conducting colleagues, as all of us students were, in awe at him, and somehow really, really scared of him. It was following on the tradition of the old maestri, for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you say that he was very much into stick technique when he was trained by Swarovski in Vienna. And as I've said on previous podcasts, Swarovski famously only used to give about 10 or 15 minutes of stick technique talk to his, Zubi Mehta has gone on record as saying, probably in the whole time I was there, he talked about technique for about 10 minutes. So he must have picked that up from Eastman, or decided that, he was going to concentrate more on that before he went to the music.
Definitely. I think that's what I mean by the various different influences that he had in his life, and having been in America was probably what made him really very particular about the stick.
Yeah. And did you do a lot of actual conducting whilst at UCA? I mean, what I mean by that is conducting an orchestra as opposed to two pianos, or shadow conducting, or air conducting, or mirror conducting, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, that's one of the things that really made me decide to go to UCA, is that, of course, there was time with piano, but there was a lot of time with orchestra, because this is, I think, one of the only places where I can think, even nowadays. I mean, it might have changed now, because I think the degree and the curriculum has changed enormously since my time there. I mean, I graduated like 20 years ago. But we used to have, at least back then, a professional orchestra that we would conduct every week.
Wow.
Which is unheard of.
Well, I mean, other than the old days with Musin in Leningrad and the Sibelius Academy now in Helsinki, very few places have anything like that, So, I mean, what a bonus. What an absolute bonus, because then you learn to conduct more than two pianos, which is always Definitely. A bonus.
Exactly.
And so what was the next step? Having been and done your 5-year degree at UCA, where next and why?
Yeah, so by the time I was in the middle of a career, so my third, fourth year there, of course that became more and more clear that yes, conducting was also important to me, and it kind of became equally important to my life as a composer, and I started getting busier with that, and I joined two of my colleagues during my undergraduate years, and we decided to found a youth orchestra, which there was none. There was none of that in UCA. There was no student orchestra. So we went to the dean of the school. We went to the provost, and we made a proposal. And at the beginning, there was a little bit of, I remember there was some resistance. Anytime you want to open something, there is thoughts on the other side that, for example, they're trying to do this and they're going to defund the professional orchestra or something like that. And so I remember meeting some kind of resistance like that, or some people who then came and said, but, I also want to do that. Why isn't you doing it? Well, so I remember having that kind of conversation with friends, and but we succeeded, and we founded this youth orchestra. And it started as a very small chamber group with 20 people or so, and I did that for the last 2 years that I lived in Argentina. And I remember by the end of it, it was a fully fledged symphony orchestra with a choir of its own as well, with a symphonic wind ensemble, and we would do tours. And so I learned a lot from this experience about the administration side of things and fundraising side of things, which then would prove quite helpful later in life.
Yes, I'm sure. I read that when you did leave, I have two universities here: State University of New York at Buffalo and the Pennsylvania State University. Which one first? Because one was in composition and one was in conducting. So, what drew you away? Was it pen to paper or was it baton midair?
It was so I started with Penn State. That was my first entry into a US, and it was kind of by chance. Like most good things happen in life. I was actually my thought the year before I finished my degree in UCA. I was thinking of going to Germany. I had been learning German for a number of years, and I took this exam at the Goethe Institute in Buenos Aires. And they gave me a scholarship to go for a couple of months to Berlin to keep learning German. That was the reason per se of the scholarship. But of course, being there, I used it for so many wonderful musical things as well, and meeting professors at the Universität der Künste in Berlin. I was planning on doing composition in Berlin, and so I took a lot of my compositions with me of a 21-year-old bringing a few little scores, and I went to see so many concerts with the Berlin Philharmonic. I saw a wonderful workshop with Kent Nagano at the Hans Eisler School of Music. I remember so many incredible concerts I got to see. And so I went back to Buenos Aires to finish my degree for my last year. And that was all set for me, that I would apply for this scholarship to continue my career, my training in Germany. And then, probably just a few months later, I remember there was this master class with a conducting teacher at UCA. And I was chosen by Scarabino to be one of the conductors, doing this. And so I met this fantastic conducting teacher called Gerardo Edelstein. And I remember I was doing Mozart Requiem. And we had it was an immediate rapport that I hadn't felt before with him, with anyone. I mean, so we chatted, and he happened to be the conducting professor at Penn State. And of course, he encouraged me to apply to do this degree. And there was something so special about him and about how much I learned from him in such a short moment in a masterclass situation that I went ahead, and that's how my plans changed.
Well, I think that happens. A friend of mine, Niko Kaspustiansky, I've probably pronounced his name wrong, who did a similar thing. I think he appeared in a masterclass with a teacher in the US and ended up going there for a year or two and doing a master's in conducting, and it was down to, again, rapport, and it was down to a mutual respect and bond, and off he went and did 2 years there, and I think that happens, even for instrumentalists. They go and play for somebody, and somebody says, well, if you're thinking of studying, come and be in my class. And it's a good way also for the teacher of thinking, well, I've got somebody talented here. I can invest, I can give, I can help. And so a second teacher, different to Scarabino, I'm assuming.
Very, very different. So this is probably what I found so attractive. And I'm again, very grateful for the very rigorous training that Scarabino gave me, because I found that was maybe a different kind of teacher would not have picked so much interest in me in conducting. But there were so many hoops to jump through and so many difficulties to get through that I found it a great challenge to study with Scarabino. And then my second teacher, Edelstein, was very, very different. He had trained at the Rubin Academy in Jerusalem. And he was also actually from Argentina, but he left very young. He was, I think, 19 when he went to Jerusalem. And then it was not at all, like you said, just like in the Swarovski sense, not at all focused on the stick. It was all about breathing. It was all about phrasing. It was all about different kind of imagination that I hadn't been exposed to before. So to me, it was very complementary to my original training, and I'm so grateful for that.
Well, I mean, while we're on the subject of teachers, looking at your biography, I'm going to list the people that you list on your biography. And early in your conducting life, we all go to masterclasses or to master's programs like you did in the US, or your first teacher, or in my case, I sat meters away from people week in, week out, conducting in front of me, and they're all different. And you have to form a way of taking from them what you need and discarding the rest. I mean, what can you tell me that you took from and the others on the list, that people you said that you've been taught by or been mentored by: Michael Tilson-Thomas, Peter Ertversch, Leonard Slatkin, Andrea Pestalozza, and Martin Brabins. I mean, that's 5 more names there. What can you say that you got from those that you hadn't got from Edelstein or Scarabino?
It's all people that I adore and that I'm so lucky to have had, contact with, and that I've learned so incredibly much from. With MTT, I was his assistant with the San Francisco Symphony for 2 years, 2 seasons. So, the incredible experience of seeing him rehearse Mahler symphonies or Beethoven symphonies or Copland or Stravinsky with that orchestra, one of the greatest orchestras in the world. Being, with him in his dressing room, chatting and fooling around, piano for hands, all of those incredible moments that I cherish. The generosity that he had, just giving me so much of his time backstage, talking, being his note delivery boy at occasions just before. I mean, he's a meticulous worker. This was to me so eye-opening, seeing somebody at his level after being for 20 plus years with that orchestra. They typically do 3-4 concerts a week of the same program, and occasionally it would be the third program, and of course sometimes we would be recording the Schumann symphonies or whatever it might be that week for their own label. And so, besides having been his extra pair of ears in the hall for balance, for color, articulation, anything, as you know, I would be, just before the concert, always wearing a nice suit, because I knew that MTT might ask me to go on stage and deliver this note to the principal second violin or whoever it might be, that, okay, tell them that, this articulation needs to be such and such in this bar.
Wow.
So all of this taught me so much about this, keeping fresh, alive the performance up to the very last minute. Even though we've played the symphony 3 times this week, there's one more, and it is really important that we do it differently this time. With Martin Brabins, an incredible conductor, wonderful person, wonderful teacher. I studied with him at the Orkney conducting course. I was very lucky to be invited to this course. I did it at least twice, I think. So I love that place. And the fantastic whiskey that you find up there on the beer.
I always wanted to do that course. Well, around the time that I started conducting, I thought, well, if there was one course I wanted to go and do, because I met Martin when I was 20, I think I was, and also because of the location. I thought, that's a course I always wanted to do, and that was with the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra, wasn't it?
Yeah, 1 year it was with the BBC Scottish, the other year it was with the Royal National Scottish Orchestra.
Yes.
And 1 year, I remember the first time I did it, it was with Sean Edwards, which I know has been on your podcast as well. Another wonderful teacher. And the second time it was with Martin. And then with Martin we developed a relationship. He was also very, very generous with me. He invited me to assist him with the BBC Symphony in London. And it was for highly complex programs. I remember the first time I assisted him, it was for an total immersion Ferneyhough program.
Right.
Brian Ferneyhough program.
No wonder complicated.
I remember the score was so incredibly large that the publisher sent me the smaller one that they sent me was 2 or 3 feet tall. And they said, and it was so tiny that I could barely see anything. So they said, we're going to have in your hotel the full-size score ready. And I got there. It was at least 5 feet tall, the score. I remember they had to build a special, wooden type of attachment to the conductor's stand for Martin and me to use.
And in Maida Vale in London, I can tell you, dear listeners, the music stand's already pretty large as it is. I mean, to have to make that music stand bigger is ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
It was.
That experience with Martin and the BBC Symphony Orchestra, you were assisting him, but in other places like San Francisco with MTT, but also you did some cover conducting with the National Symphony Orchestra of Washington, D.C. Can you tell us, there is a subtle difference between being a cover conductor and being an assistant conductor. What does cover conducting really mean?
Yeah, so the difference, for example, with Martin, it was very hands-on, and I was actively working in rehearsals. In fact, part of the reason why he brought me there all the way from California to London was he was doing sectionals with even with such a great orchestra as the BBC Symphony, who can sight read pretty much anything.
Yeah, they
The
can.
music was so thick and so textural that he wanted to clean it up and make sure that it would come super clean. And so he was working with various groups in the strings. I was conducting rehearsals, and I remember I was there only for 2 days, I think, was full rehearsals, like 4 or 5 sectional rehearsals a day. And I remember clearly because I was in the run of Bluebeard's Castle here in California, and I had to kind of leave for 2 or 3 days to do Ferneyhough in a very intense way, and it was just one piece that I was working on, La Terre est un homme, extremely massively individualistic for every musician in the orchestra. Every string player had their own part, of course, all the winds and the cymbalom and all the great percussion, and so I was very actively working as the second conductor, as the assistant, whereas in experiences like with the National Symphony, those weeks I was there, I was just ready to jump in. That's essentially what you do as the cover conductor. You need to know the repertoire inside out, go to the rehearsals, make sure you know how things were done, and sometimes you don't get to interact so much with the conductor you're covering for.
So you're not expected to give balance suggestions. You're not expected to necessarily even spend much time with the person who's conducting. You're literally there. You must know the score backwards, and you're finding out how the main conductor, in inverted commas, is going to conduct the concert. And should he or she fall over and break their arm, you can jump in and cover them at any minute's notice.
That's exactly right.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, in some jobs in the UK now, I suppose it's an amalgamation of those two, where you're expected, or you could be asked to give balances. If you're an assistant conductor, you will of course meet all of the conductors and probably end up having a meal or two with them and get to know them and maybe get lessons off them. But again, if you're around, you're expected to jump in. So it's sort of an amalgamation of that. I mean, other people have mentioned being cover conductors, and I know personal friends of mine who've done it. That must be fascinating to watch the process, but then slightly frustrating when you don't get to jump in.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it worked with MTT, because my relationship initially with him and the San Francisco Symphony was to go and serve as his cover conductor. So to begin with, yes, I was expected just to be there, knowing all the scores and ready to jump in if needed. But as our relationship also became more interesting, with me spending more time with him backstage, he started asking more of me, and by the time I didn't even realize my relationship had changed into more of an assistant role, where if we were doing recordings, he was asking for a lot of my input, not just in the hall but afterwards, and taking notes and going into the recording booth and all sorts of things that normally a cover conductor wouldn't do.
Yeah. It means that he's learned to trust you and your ears over that time. And you went on and did, you conducted subscription concerts and you guest conducted there. And that's, it's a wonderful way in, isn't it? When you sort of gain the trust and a relationship with a music director.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, either happen or don't. You can't force them. And I was very, very grateful for his support and his generosity.
Talking of guest conducting, it's something that I discuss often with people. And you not only have guest conducted pretty much all around the world in symphonic terms, but you've also done opera, English National Opera, back home in Argentina at the Teatro Colón. I'm assuming you like a good mixture of that, because obviously an opera production takes 6 or 8 weeks and you're expected to be around and then conduct the first performances, or maybe the whole run. I know none of us are guesting at the moment. But that guest conducting, standing up in front of an orchestra for the first time, putting the beat down and not knowing what's coming back. How is it for you? And then maybe you can tell us a bit more about, how much you enjoy working in the opera world.
Yeah, so I should say in the US it seems quite a separated business. You're either an opera conductor or you're a symphony conductor. I don't know why it is so separated really. Whereas
And I don't think it should be.
it shouldn't be because one thing really fits the other for sure.
Yeah.
And I think it's a lot more unified in Europe at least.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love both equally, and having a chance of doing both is so important to me. And that moment, that initial moment you mentioned as a guest conductor, showing up for the first time with an orchestra you don't know, you've never been in front of, I think it's can be nerve-wracking, but it's also really important, I think, as a conductor, as you gain more and more experience, to learn how to trust right away. And the more you trust, the more you will be able to give, the more you will receive. Whereas if you get behind that wall of nerves, it's not good for anybody.
No, it's never good for anybody. And whilst guest conducting, since 2012, you've been the music director of the Camellia Symphony Orchestra, which is in Sacramento. How many weeks a year is that for you? And how much of the public face element of being a music director in the US are you required to do? Going to fundraising parties and receptions and speaking to philanthropists and things like that.
So that is really essential here, which
Yeah,
is
of
one of the
course.
things that many conductors who are not from here, like Daniel Barenboim, they hate that aspect of how important there is in the U.S. because we receive almost literally no government support.
No.
So luckily there are many people in this country who realize the responsibility they have, especially if they have some extra cash around, that unless they donate some of that money to arts organizations, they're not going to have these arts organizations anymore.
No.
So I've learned, I've been for nearly half of my life in this country, and I've learned so much from these experiences, and I actually enjoy it. In the end, I see my role as somebody through which you can help connect with people in the community who are actually very happy to support the organization. At the beginning, I remember it could be uncomfortable to think, oh, why? How am I going to ask for money? How does this work? But in fact, the more you connect with these people and you actually build relationships and friendships, you realize they're thrilled to be able to help and support the organization. And it feels quite a virtuous cycle that this is so meaningful to them that they're glad to be a part of it.
Well, it's sort of forming or helping expand the family, isn't it? The family of people who are interested, involved, invested, and not just financially invested, emotionally invested, time invested in an orchestra such as Camellia Symphony Orchestra. That you're building the family of people who are they're linked to you, and they'll be around to support you. And I think that, yeah, I mean, even orchestras that are centrally funded by governments, I think it's something that they should do, even if it means that they promise other things in other ways. But to reach out into the community is such an important thing.
Absolutely, and the more you learn about them, the more you realize also that certain people might be very likely to want to support this or that project, but not that other one. And so it becomes very natural in the end that that you want to support this young opera singers, and you know who you have to talk to.
Yes.
You wanna support a Russian program, and you know which kind of person you want to reach out to as well.
And so I'm not sure you told me, but if you did remind me, how many weeks a year is that? How big is the Camellia Symphony Orchestra? Because I don't know about it. How many members do you have? How many weeks of concerts do you give? Do you have guest conductors?
So we typically have 6 subscription concerts a year with Camellia Symphony. We also have a few smaller runouts. We like to perform free family concerts, so featuring sometimes young artists. It's actually the orchestra has an important role in Sacramento, where we expose many kids, especially of underserved areas, to music for the first time. So, in addition to have the regular series, we have this other series called Free Family Concerts, where anybody can come, and we have a lot of homeless people coming to those concerts as well. We have a lot of kids from, there's a school in Howe Avenue, for example, which is many of the students come from refugee families from many different countries. Some of them don't even speak English yet. In fact, there is a fantastic music teacher in this school, Gail Winnie, who is teaching the kids English through music. I mean, they start drumming.
Wow.
These kids start connecting with one another that way. There was a phenomenal article in the paper about her program. And so I saw this article and I reached out to her and I said, I want to offer you tickets to our performances so that your students and their families can come. And it was very, very moving. We invited them not just to the free concerts, but to the actual subscription ones. To every concert we would give a certain number of tickets, and many of the kids and their families would come, and we would receive then dozens of letters and cards and written in many different languages, from Farsi to Arabic, and you name it. I mean, these kids, a lot of them came from Syria, from Iraq. It's just very, very special to be able to do these things.
Wow, that's amazing. What a wonderful initiative. Super. Well, absolutely wonderful. So if you're not conducting Camellia Symphony Orchestra or doing your role as music director in Sacramento and wider and beyond, and you're not guest conducting and you're not doing an opera run somewhere, you're still composing. I read you're a prize-winning composer and you're still having pieces performed, I believe. How do you find time? I spoke to Bramwell Tovey about this, and he sort of sets himself so much time a day if he's got time. He's an early morning person. When do you write? How do you try and write so much a day, or do you do it all in a big lump of a period and don't conduct at that point?
That's exactly how it works for me.
Right.
Just trying to lump it all in one period where, when I'm in a conducting run, I find it very difficult because, as you know, when you're, at least I can be very obsessive learning music and learning a score, and you're hearing that score in your head a lot of the time. And if you're doing opera, oh my goodness.
Yeah, all of the time.
The whole, yeah. And so I find it very difficult with all of that, those sounds going in my head, to actually be able to produce my own sounds. So the last piece I wrote, it was a violin concerto, and I would wake up, 4 in the morning, and walk for a good 4 hours, completely uninterrupted. I would force myself, no newspapers, no social media, no emails, nothing of the sort, and just get to work. And then that would be the very, very productive moment for several weeks, 3 weeks at least, to have most of the piece done. And then otherwise, sometimes it's finding those moments like Mahler would do the summer, or whatever you can find, and just take out of your regular everyday life. But it works for me better to do it that way. I remember I used to be more of a nighttime composer, especially when I was much younger, in my 20s. I could begin at midnight, and when I was living in Buenos Aires, as you know, that city never sleeps.
Yeah, nothing goes to sleep there. Yeah, exactly.
And so I would stay awake till 3, till 4, and those were my composing hours.
Yeah,
but it's kind of changed.
Well, maybe that's because we get older.
Exactly.
Yeah, the temptations of being up at 3 or 4 in the morning are not quite as big as they were. What's interesting about working late at night is that when I first started conducting, I would come home from playing the violin, and I would often stay up until 2 marking up my scores. Now, you've done a lot, as you said, Fernie Ho, and lots of other contemporary music, I know because I've read about it. So how do you mark up and learn a score? I'm assuming, and maybe naively, that because through doing a lot of contemporary music, you do write things in your scores. Do you use colours? And how do you go about learning a brand new score? If you're doing it contemporary or even going back to an old favourite, what's your method?
Oh, This is such an important question. It
It
varies so
is.
much by conductors, really. But I
Well,
remember one.
it's why conducting geeks and conducting students are so happy that I ask you all this, because they get tips, but they also realize that maybe, there isn't a specific way, and you just got to find your own way.
Yeah, I remember I was never into colors. My scores are very much, I like using pencil because I
Yeah,
love being able to erase. MTT has those pencils that are half blue, half red. He uses that a lot.
yeah.
But I was never into pencils. And I remember in one of the times I was at the Orkney conducting course, and Martin was teasing and teasing and teasing another American conductor that was there. The name shall remain secret. And he was just laughing and laughing that this guy had a system with like 5, 8, 10 colors, and if
Oh,
it's
wow.
dynamics, it's one color. If it's articulation, it's another one. If it's a crescendo, it's one color. If it's decrescendo, it's another one. And so Martin would not stop laughing about this. So for me, what works is just simplicity. I like not to write too much, just to stick to the bare bones of things, especially when a score is very complex, with metrical modulations or things like this. I try to keep it as simple as possible, and develop a system that is gonna work for me and that is gonna help me know exactly which kind of upbeat do I need to give for the new tempo or anything like that.
And do you sit at your desk and do it in your head, or do you use a piano? Are you somebody who would start at the beginning and work your way through, or are you somebody who would, go from big to small?
I try to do all of that, all of the above. So yes, the piano, of course, I use. I also do a lot of work at the desk.
Yeah.
I try to probably go to the overall first, and then go into smaller, really, the sections that I think need the most attention. And then go back to the overall again to see if you see it differently.
Yeah.
That's kind of how I try to do it.
It's interesting you're talking about going from overall to small and then back to overall. I think, that's something I do a lot in that, if possible, if I'm given the date well enough in advance, that I will mark up and learn my score 6 to 9 months ahead. And then in the 2 or 3 weeks before the date is coming up, or the week's rehearsal's coming up, I'll then go back to the start and sort of start on the outside and work back in again, even though I've marked it up in my red, blue, and black. I will then do it again with fresh eyes, and hopefully that it seeped in 6 months before and 9 months before, and then I'll find something new. It works for me. Doesn't I'm not sure it works for everybody else.
Yeah, and time, like you said, 6, 9 months, the time can really change your perception of things, which goes to your other question about a score that you've used before, that you've conducted before. And when I have sometimes of some scores I have multiple copies of, because precisely I like the idea of revisiting something, if possible, with fresh eyes. And when you're kind of reacting to your own previous judgment or assessment, I like to, at least you might be using that larger score, but at least go to the score, have a miniature one, and look at it again and see if there is something that catches your attention that you hadn't thought about before. And something else I like doing is singing a lot.
Mm.
So I will, especially with a passage that you need to try and figure out phrasing, or where the peak really is, or anything like that. I do like that little challenge of saying, okay, these 8 bars, I need to see how I would play this, how I would sing it, and here's the horn, or whatever it might be.
I think that's a very good thing to do. I wouldn't wish my singing on anybody, but I think even if I hum it, or make sure that there's nobody in the house if I'm going to do anything like singing. But but I do think it's a very good thing to do, to learn the phrasing. And even sometimes I've done it with a solo, a woodwind solo, and I've sort of sung it through and through. Well, where do I have to breathe, and where is breathing bad? That sort of thing. That I think it helps.
And sometimes it's so much easier, especially if you have to explain, during a rehearsal, the phrasing or something, and it might save a lot of time if you sing it, sing those 4 bars rather than explain, and then you go and a little crescendo here, or
Yeah, absolutely true. Absolutely true. Christian, it's 10 questions time, and as I'm sure you know, they start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
May I have more than one per
Of course
each?
you may. Absolutely, yes.
Because I was thinking, I love nature, but I also love so many other things. So if I was to go in nature, I think the sound of the ocean and the waves, it just makes me go ready for surfing.
And
So
probably makes you go back home, I suppose, to Mar del
absolutely,
Plata. Yeah.
I was born in a house not so far away from the ocean, so the sound of the ocean is very it's emotional for me as well. But I would say if I had to choose a man-made kind of sound, it's the sound of a wine bottle being uncorked.
Very good. Malbec, or do you not care?
Oh, my favorite, of course.
Yeah, it's my favourite too. I mean, I liked it before I went to Argentina, but now I've been many times. I know which ones I like and which ones I like even more.
And especially when you're down there, you can find so many. I mean, you can find a lot of Argentinian wine abroad, really,
Yeah.
but when you go to Argentina, you can find so many ones.
Well, they're like any other wine producing country that, I'm sure they sell some very good ones abroad, but they keep the very, very, very best ones back for themselves.
For sure.
Yeah. And a sound that you hate, or more than one sound that you hate.
The voice of Donald Trump.
Well, for those people who are listening to this podcast, we're doing this exactly 7 days before Mr. Trump officially, supposedly leaves the White House. But of course, it may happen before then. We'll never know. But I think you're the second person to not mention Trump directly, but Holly Matheson, all the way back in episode 2. Her sound that she hated with the sound of American politics. So she wasn't quite as direct, but I think with 7 days to go, he's not going to come round and knock on the door. And
It would be so lovely not to have to hear his voice anymore, but one can only hope.
If you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
Well, it's kind of not long enough to go to Hawaii, so perhaps trying. I love cooking, so perhaps trying one of those very long recipes that are tempting but complicated, scary. Maybe doing some amazing croissant or something like that.
Who would be a favorite conductor of yesteryear?
Carlos Kleiber, Claudio Bado, Günter Vandt, Pierre Boulez, all for different reasons, obviously.
Yes. Gunter Vandt has not come up very often, if at all, before.
Wow.
And a wonderful conductor, and well, especially Bruckner. I mean, his Bruckner's almost
His
unsurpassable.
Bruckner, his Brahms as well.
Yeah.
I'm surprised.
Yeah, and actually, I'm not sure whether Boulez has come up particularly often. I played for the man, and it was a fascinating and very enjoyable, exciting week. But he hasn't come up on this question too often.
Well, I think it's not your typical conductor's conductor, maybe.
No.
But I think he could be so incredibly amazing for so much repertoire.
Yeah, we played a piece of his for him, and I remember his ear being so frighteningly good that I think he turned to one of the viola desks that were each desk had its own part, and he turned around and said, "No, those notes are wrong there." And I know you wrote it, but you're not supposed to be able to hear each individual desk. That's ridiculous.
That reminds me of Peter Edvosh. He's exactly that same way. That kind of X-ray ear that he will hear anything.
That's frightening, isn't it? Well, are there any favorite current conductors who might have X-ray ears? What would your choices be?
Yeah, so again, it really depends on the repertoire, but I
Yeah.
would mention for different reasons Paavo Järvi, Christian Thielemann, MTT, and I love also the imagination, the freedom of Rene Jacobs.
Well, again, 2 choices on there that have not come up, and maybe MTT has, but Thielemann and Rene Jacobs, 2 names that definitely haven't come up before. Brilliant answers. Again, Thielemann and Bruckner. I could watch those on the Philharmonic Concert Hall over and over again.
Yes.
I'm not sure so much about his Beethoven, but his Bruckner, yes, definitely. And
His
Rene
Wagner.
Jacobs, yeah, and his Wagner, of course, yeah, absolutely, yeah. What is the hardest work you have ever conducted?
I'm tempted to say several works by Ligeti, and he's a composer that has been very close to me, and I've conducted many of his works, perhaps his Violin Concerto.
Yeah.
But I'm also tempted to say that one can find difficulty in simplicity as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Sometimes, the incomprehensible simplicity in a Mozart score can be much more difficult and daunting than a very complex score by Stockhausen or Elliott Carter.
Yeah. That's true. Absolutely true. I mean, some of the hardest things ever have to conduct are, Strauss waltzes and polkas, especially the waltzes.
Yeah,
To make them sound fluid and natural is just one of the hardest things in the world.
just to find a way for it not to get stale and boring, and yeah,
Yeah, yeah, and make it sound like it should, like the Vienna Phil on January the 1st. It's
exactly.
some of the hardest things you ever have to do. When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
A good book. Um, it's important for me. I mean, today is the age of Netflix, and we all watch all sorts of things. You have access to anything all the time. But I think something that can keep you focused and distract. I think it's important to keep your mind off of scores sometimes, and a good book can really help you do that. So that you don't obsess over a score, but come back to it with a fresh mind. But I should also mention I'm quite fond of my electric toothbrush.
What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I think it would be fun to see some very unusual or impossible pairings. And I'm talking about, we're always used to safety and guarantees in the business, the right kind of pairings on the same level. Managements and agents tend not to take risks. But how about if we shuffle it all around? Orchestras and soloists and conductors completely interchanged, like in a fantasy world. Imagine, I don't know, Valery Gergiev, how would he deal with being paired with a school orchestra, accompanying a concerto that is not necessarily his usual repertoire? Or the Berlin Philharmonic, used to working with the greatest conductors in the world, and imagine you expose them to a 15-year-old aspiring conductor at the helm, doing a little arrangement instead of a usual masterpiece. Or Cavacos playing as a soloist with a minor regional orchestra, or Karajan rehearsing an orchestra of 100 double basses or guitars.
Well, but the point about that is that some of that is so fantastic that it is funny, but some of that actually really does make the mind think. I like that answer very much. I mean, I've been in a couple of those situations where, an amateur orchestra I've been conducting since the very beginning of my conducting here in Birmingham. And through various sets of circumstances, we ended up doing a concert in a very small concert hall north of Birmingham in a place called Sutton Coldfield. So it was my amateur orchestra in a very small concert hall doing Brahms's first piano concerto with Stephen Huff. And
Wow.
yeah, I mean, what was amazing was that, the orchestra were obviously in awe of him, but he was just so wonderfully easy to work with. He was wonderful with them, very complimentary. Of course, the whole place was packed out. But I'd love to see a lot more of those sorts of things happen. I think that would be wonderful.
It would be fantastic, especially. I mean, I probably took it to the extreme comical,
But you
in a sense,
you made your point. Yeah, you're right.
in a sense, you know what I mean. That it would be
Yeah.
refreshing to see a bit more freedom within the business side of. Sometimes that word business is a scary one, and
Yeah.
it gets stale. And this idea of safety and not taking risks, it can be very detrimental to art making. And
Yeah.
it would be nice to see that change, especially once this pandemic is over.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I think being a sommelier, I mean, wine and food and the relationship between the two are also an art form. And I don't know, it would be quite a treat. It would be quite fun doing that. I probably would be terrible, but I imagine myself enjoying it.
Well, I'll tell you a little story about my big passion away from music is cricket, and I got to meet somebody who I think has possibly one of the greatest jobs in the world. He spends most of his life either writing match reports for newspapers on cricket matches, so he sits and watches cricket all day, and then his other job is a journalist writing for wine magazines. So his job is watching cricket and drinking wine. Well, I
Wow.
mean, yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah, how do some people get this? Lovely man.
What a
His
lucky
name-
person.
yeah, his name's Jeff Dean. Really lovely man, and yeah, what a lucky job. But yeah, that would be a wonderful thing to do, wouldn't it? Sommelier.
So fun.
But also, I mean, there's an element you would have to train quite hard for that. It's quite rigorous training, isn't it?
Oh yes, I mean, one can say, just like somebody would claim, oh, a plane pilot or an orchestra conductor, and without the rigorous training, forget about it. And this is
Yeah.
exactly the same. I think if you want to be a good one, you need to work super hard to achieve that level.
Well, let's find out which which wine you're going to choose for question 10. If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Well, without a doubt, it would be a wonderful Argentinian steak, and accompanied by a nice bottle of Malbec. I mean, if you have me name one,
Well, why not?
I
Yeah.
it would be by Weinert, the winery.
Mhm.
And there is one wine of theirs that I haven't tried yet, but every single wine of theirs that I've tried is remarkable. And this would be for a very special occasion. Obviously, there is a 1977 Malbec, Estrella, so the star. And I think it's actually the wine that made Argentinian wine famous internationally, because it was, I think, Robert Parker Jr. who traveled to Mendoza, shortly after 77, and visited this vineyard, the Vineyard, and he wrote an article that launched Argentinian wines to the world, and claiming that this is really like 19th century winemaking. We don't see this kind of places anymore, certainly not in Napa and in most places in Europe. I mean, he wrote something like, they don't use stainless steel, this is all wood, how does these people do it? So yeah, that's a winery I really like.
Well, I think we've basically going out on the same meal. In episode 1, in the taster episode, I gave the answer that it would be an Argentinian meal with Malbec, possibly starting with some empanadas and a bottle of Quilmes, which I know Argentinians don't necessarily think is a great beer. I do. But, maybe if our final meal could be together, we could enjoy the same wine and the same meal. And I've really enjoyed chatting to you, Christian. It's been wonderful. And I hope very much to meet up with you, preferably in Buenos Aires, and we can sit down and we can do that exact meal in the future.
I would love that, Mike, and thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun and very, very enjoyable. Thank you.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a British conductor who won the 2017 Besançon Young Conductors Competition, and has since gone on to become principal conductor of Glyndebourne Touring Opera and music director of Opera de Rouen. But until then, bye-bye.